In this lesson, I will be discussing about different classes of IP addresses. IP addresses have been divided into 5 different classes, and a class of any given IP address can be identified by looking at the first octet of that address. So, if the value of the first octet of an IP address falls between 0 and 127, it is considered to be falling under class A. If it is between 128 and 191, it falls in class B category. If it is between 192 and 223, it belongs to class C. And if it is between 224 and 239, it is considered class D. And finally, if it is between 240 to 255, it is considered class E. We know that an IP address is 32 bits long and it is divided into 4 equal parts, divided into 4 bytes. And for us to determine the class of an IP address, only the value of first byte would be sufficient to give us the clue. So for now, I'm going to remove the second, third and fourth byte and focus on the first byte only. And let's go over one class at a time, how exactly the minimum and the maximum value are derived. So putting the first byte into 8 different bits, what we'll do is, for class A, fix the first bit, which is the position of 128 to 0, like this, and then vary the rest of the 7 bits from all the way to all zeros to all ones. So let's do and see what values we get. So if I go ahead and set all the remaining 7 bits to 0, like this, one by one, I get the decimal value of 0, and this is my minimum value. Likewise, if I set the remaining 7 bits to all ones, like this will give me a decimal equivalent of 127. This becomes my maximum value. So this is how I derive my range for class A. Again, the key thing to remember here is the bit position 128 value is always set to 0. Okay, that's how I get the range of 0 to 127. We'll apply the same method to class B also, but change the rule a little bit. So we have our first 8 bits. Okay, here I'm going to set the value of the first 2 bits, that is the 128 position and the 64 bit position, to 1 and 0. And now I will vary the remaining 6 bits from all zeros to all ones. So let's do it. So setting all the values of the remaining 6 bits to zeros, I get a decimal equivalent of 128, and this becomes my minimum value for class B. And then if I set all the remaining 6 bits to ones, like this, I get a decimal equivalent of 191. This becomes my maximum value for class B. So to summarize, the value of class B is ranges 128 to 191. Okay. So now you must have got a clue of how we are deriving these minimum maximum values. I'll apply the same for class C. Take the first 8 bits, but this time fix the first 3 bits, that is the position 128, 64 and 32 to 110, like this. That leaves us with the remaining 5 bits. These 5 bits can be varied from 0 to all ones. And let's see what is the minimum value we get. By setting all the 5 bits to zeros, the decimal equivalent is 192. This is the minimum value for class C. And then if I set all the remaining 5 bits to ones, I get a decimal value of 223. That becomes my maximum value for class C. Hence, the range for class C has been derived to 192 to 223. Applying the same method to class D, but this time setting the first 4 bits to, which are 128, 64, 32 and 16 to 1110. We fix this and now we are left with 4 other bits. For these we'll vary from 0 to 1 and get our minimum and maximum values. To derive the minimum value, we set all the 4 bits to zeros. That leads us to the decimal value of 224. This is the minimum. And then if I vary and set all these remaining 4 bits to ones, that gives me a total decimal value of 239. This becomes my maximum value for class D. And hence the range for class D is 224 to 239. And then finally for class E, what we'll do is we'll set the first 4 bits to all ones. 128 bits set to 1, 64 bits set to 1, 32 bits set to 1, and the position for 16 bit is also set to 1. And then for deriving the minimum value, I set the remaining 4 bits to zeros. That gives me the minimum value of 240. And if I set all of them to ones, that gives me the value of 255, which becomes the maximum. So the class E ranges 240 to 255. This is how we derive it. So keep this in mind. The rule of thumb, if you want to calculate, if you are forgetting what is the range, for class A, set it to first bit to 0. For class B, set the first 2 bits to 10. For class C, set the first 3 bits to 110. For class D, set the first 4 bits to 1110. And for class E, set the first 4 bits to 1111. And then you vary the values for the remaining bits, and that's how you can derive the minimum and the maximum values. So to summarize, this is what we get after using this derivation. The values 0 and 127 that as of now we see are falling in the category class A are reserved for important purpose, and that is why we exclude them from class A, and that is the reason the modified range for class A becomes 1 to 126. Class E addresses are reserved for experimental purposes and you will never see them in live traffic. Class D addresses are special addresses and they are used for multicast traffic. For now, our focus will be on class A, B and C. Okay. Now let us crystallize our concept by going over some questions. So the first question is, which class do these IP addresses belong to? So we have 3 IP addresses and we have to identify the class of each IP address. So remember, class A range is, for the first octet is 1 to 126, class B 128 to 191, and class C is 192 to 223. So if you look at this, the first octet of option A is 128 and it is falling in the class B's range, which is 128 to 191, and that is the reason the option A IP address belongs to class B. For option B, the first byte value is 11 and it falls under the range 1 to 126, which happens to be for class A. Therefore, option B IP address belongs to class A. For option C, the value of the first byte is 200 and it is falling in the range 192 to 223, which is for class C. Therefore, this IP address belongs to class C range. Okay. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following IP address class is reserved for experimental purpose? And we know, as we discussed, the class E is the one which is reserved for experimental purpose. And then the next question asks us which class is used for multicast, and that is for class D. And finally, the last question focuses on which two values in the class A are reserved for special purpose, and those are 0 and 127, and that's why we said the modified range for class A is 1 to 126.